Kong, the eighth wonder of the world.
You know those moments where you're playing a game and you think to yourself, man, these developers did not need to go so hard on this right now. Think about hearing the musical perfection of David Wise's aquatic ambiance in a random underwater level of Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo. Or gazing out towards the picturesque sunset off the coast of Majula in Dark Souls 2, a view providing a whisper of hope in an otherwise hopeless journey. Or Metaphor ReFantazio's mind-bogglingly stylish UI, every frame of which could be hung up and displayed for the masses at a Louvre for weebs. These developers did not need to go so hard, but I, for one, am glad they did. Now, imagine a movie tie-in game. Yes, that subsection of games that are so often discounted as quick and dirty cash grabs riddled with time crunch jank and purchased by unsuspecting parents across the globe because they didn't know any better. But against all odds, one of these somehow managed to deliver this feeling of they didn't need to go this hard time and time again over the course of its brief runtime. In November 2005, Ubisoft released Peter Jackson's King Kong: The Official Game of the Movie, or PJKKTOGOTM, as those of us in the biz call it. The game capitalized on the director's much-anticipated follow-up to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and man, they did not need to go so hard and deliver an Apex movie tie-in game right as the whole enterprise started to come crashing down. Having an easy-to-market game to go alongside the release of a big movie has been around for as long as the medium of games itself. You olds out there might remember how the majesty of Star Wars arcade cabinets and infamy of E.T. the Extraterrestrial for the 2600 helped pave the way for decades of licensed movie tie-ins for everything from the biggest Hollywood blockbusters to the most unlikely of television series. Us slightly less olds in the 90s grew up with Disney tentpoles like The Lion King and Aladdin, the latter of which had a Super Nintendo version featuring the talents of a young pre-Resi Shinji Mikami. The Jurassic Park and Alien franchises both had a mess of different adaptations, and by the time 1997 rolled around, console shooters and multiplayer as a whole were redefined by Rare's GoldenEye 007 on the Nintendo 64. Of course, these sat alongside some other oddities, for lack of a better word. Not sure who thought that Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula or the Tim Allen sitcom Home Improvement needed games, but we got both of them nonetheless. And then there's the dreadful Street Fighter the movie, the Ouroboros of a game based on a movie, based on a game that's based on movies, and is also just really, really bad. Fast forward a bit, and the 2000s brought with it some big swings from a couple of solid bangers, like Starbreeze's The Chronicles of Riddick, Escape from Butcher Bay, Treyarch's Spider-Man 2, and EA's pair of Lord of the Rings games in The Two Towers and Return of the King. But I'd argue that this trend culminated in what Ubisoft Montpellier did with King Kong in 2005. Montpellier was one of Ubisoft's flagship studios, creating hits like the Rayman trilogy and beloved cult classic Beyond Good and Evil, the latter of which may or may not be getting a sequel at some point before the heat death of the universe. The fact that the studio was known for working on creations of their own made them a strange choice to adapt Peter Jackson's movie, but it turns out that Jackson himself pushed for the collaboration, becoming a fan of their work after playing the aforementioned Beyond Good and Evil. Kong was obviously no stranger to the world of video games, including everything from Rampage to the flagship Nintendo character that led to an unsuccessful lawsuit from Universal over its similarity to the cinematic ape. But there has never been a game version of the eighth wonder of the world quite like what Ubisoft was cooking up.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, before I tell you any more, I'm going to show you the greatest thing your eyes have ever beheld.
Released on the precipice of a console generation shift, this take on Kong launched on November 17th, 2005 on PlayStation 2, GameCube, the original Xbox, and PC, alongside different versions on handheld platforms. However, the version I hold near and dear to my heart arrived a week later on November 22nd as a pillar of the Xbox 360 launch lineup, alongside Call of Duty 2, a pair of rare misses in Cameo and Perfect Dark Zero, and the rad-as-hell free downloadable gem Hexic. While none of these games enter the console launch pantheon of Super Mario 64, Halo, or Breath of the Wild, the lineup as a whole was certainly nothing to sneeze at. And honestly, at the time, Kong was not only one of the most visually impressive games I'd ever played, but it took risks and colored outside the lines of what we expected from a shooter in 2005 with some choices that remain impressive even 20 years later. For this archival series, I've tried to replay and capture everything on original or at least official hardware. Good news is that the 360 version is backwards compatible on the Series X. Bad news is that I had to track down a used physical copy of the game because, of course, it was delisted from the Xbox Marketplace in 2015, so another win for Team Video Game Preservation is a mess and needs to be fixed before we lose decades of art to the cruel flow of time. On the plus side, hearing the 360 startup sound sent a rush of endorphins through my big dumb brain, once again proving that consoles used to have so much more personality than they do now. The 40 or so bite-sized chapters across the 5-hour campaign are split between ones where you play as Adrian Brody's playwright-turned-adventurer Jack, and others where you wreck stuff as the titular Kong. Right off the bat, it's immediately apparent just how much this game actually looks, sounds, and feels like the Peter Jackson movie it released alongside. While having Jack Black in a video game-related thing has become ubiquitous in 2025, it still kinda rules hearing Brody and Naomi Watts as you push deeper into the island.
Down here! Captain Engelhorn, we're here!
It makes sense, given that the Ubisoft team had unlimited access to Jackson's creative materials across production. This relationship between mediums extends into the game's truly minimalist HUD, which serves to really immerse you in the adventure. There's no number on screen representing your ammo. Instead, your characters will shout out if a clip is full or if they're running low. This feeds into the almost immersive sim nature of the first-person levels throughout the game. You need to find sources of fire to burn away bramble or scare off would-be predators. You can use smaller critters as bait to lure larger ones away, creating a safe path for you to sneak through an area. And when shit hits the fan, your compatriots will grab weapons and items in the environment in an attempt to defend themselves. The sense of scope as you contend with towering creatures using only your wits and whatever scraps you find make for a series of really tense, really fun challenges. There's also an adapting difficulty system, as the game will invisibly add or subtract enemies from encounters depending on how you've done up to that point. Sure, some of the solutions can feel a bit rigid at times, but I really appreciated having to think outside the box in order to survive the wilds of Skull Island. As for Kong's levels, which compose about a quarter of the runtime, they flip the script on its head and give you the power fantasy of embodying the 25-foot-tall king of beasts. You swing across the jungle, bash through barriers, and snap the jaws of any T-Rex that tries to snatch away your girl. Sure, these stages are sloppy as hell to play, but they provide a nice respite from Jack's more thinky challenges. Also, Kong can enter Rage Mode, which alongside the original God of War, makes 2005 the year of your character getting really, really angry. Side note, the intense bloom at these moments really leans into the whole Brown era of games, alongside icons like Resi 4, Resistance, Gears of War, GTA 4, and of course, the Britney Spears music video for Toxic. While the game follows the familiar beats of the story, it allows moments to breathe and gives each piece of the adventure its own unique challenge. This culminates in Kong's capture, his escape, and then his final climb up and subsequent fall off the Empire State Building.
It wasn't the airplanes. It was beauty killed the beast.
Though there is an alternate ending you can unlock. Jack hops into a biplane, commits some pretty hardcore terrorism by shooting down several members of the US military, takes out a few spotlights, and then magically Kong escapes back to the island. Well, that worked out nicely. So yeah, nearly 20 years after loving the game at the launch of the Xbox 360, I had a blast during this replay. There's a bit of a debate over which version is best to play. While the 360 is the most graphically impressive and smoothest to run, the leap in hardware loses some of the artistic charm found on the previous generation. There's also the mobile and handheld versions, which all look like the kind of shoddy licensed tie-in games that we were referencing up at the top. And be warned that some of the official versions on the PC port came with Ubisoft's Star Force anti-cheat, which apparently has been known to just straight up brick computers, so if you're going to sail the high seas, probably best to stick to emulating one of the console versions. And just as a side note, I lost a ton of progress during my replay because the game glitched out right at the end of a level and didn't spawn in the exit point. And like a dummy, I'd forgotten about the archaic ritual of manual saving. Thankfully, Kong still existed in an era of cheat codes, and a few button combos later, I had a level select menu at my disposal and could finish the rest of the game without replaying a bunch of stages. Moral of the story, cheat codes rule and should be mandatory in all games forever. At the end of the day, Kong wasn't showered in year-end accolades, as most of those in 2005 went to the likes of Resident Evil 4, God of War, Shadow of the Colossus, and Psychonauts. And honestly, that makes complete sense. Kong is a lowercase g good game, but those four are uppercase I incredible games. However, Kong did take home a few trophies at the Spike TV Game Awards, including Best Cast, so yeah, that's pretty much as good as an Oscar, right?
No way! What?
And so, 20 years later, what is the legacy of Ubisoft's Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie, apart from having a god-awful title? Well, on a mechanical level, it brought hints of the immersive sim genre that we'd see blossom in the AAA space down the road, with the likes of Dishonored, Prey, and most recently Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which honestly exudes a very similar energy to Kong. And speaking of that last one, Kong's other legacy is that it felt like one of those games that marked the end of an era for the big movie tie-in. Obviously, there's no shortage of games based on another popular thing, just take a look at how many Star Wars and Marvel projects are on the horizon. And live service games like Dead by Daylight and Fortnite can oftentimes feel like a fever dream through the aisles of a Blockbuster Video, frozen in time from when Blockbuster Video still existed outside of Bend, Oregon. So why did direct movie tie-in games drift away to the land of mobile cash grabs and live service synergy? Well, one reason might be that modern AAA games tend to take way longer to develop than your average Hollywood blockbuster. Take James Gunn's upcoming Superman Legacy, set to debut in theaters this July. The movie was officially announced in January 2023, entered pre-production, and began filming in February 2024. Compare that to the upwards of a decade that many modern blockbuster games take, and the two mediums are no longer on parallel tracks for that kind of synergy, at least at the AAA level. It makes more sense to see stuff like IO Interactive's Project 007 and the aforementioned Indiana Jones, which aren't tethered to a specific movie and don't have to abide by the schedules of their cinematic brethren. As for Ubisoft Montpellier, their journey after Kong has contained enough twists and turns, from scandals to vaporware, to warrant its own video for another time. They most recently delivered last year's excellent Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, though underperforming sales led to Ubisoft disbanding the team and sending them to work on other projects. And then there's Kong himself, who just keeps trucking along in the world of video games. Although, given some of their quality, maybe it'd just be best to let the big guy rest for a little while, yeah? Part of me thinks about an alternate reality where the past 2 decades were filled with movie tie-in games. Where most would be pretty forgettable, every so often we'd get a true diamond in the rough. A world where we had From Software's take on The Green Knight, that game company's Dune, and David Cage's Megalopolis, which honestly I think is just Megalopolis. Are those terrible ideas better off not existing? Yes, almost certainly. But do I also miss a time when a developer on a hot streak could adapt a movie from a director on a hot streak and produce a game that simply did not need to go as hard as it did? Yes, absolutely.